Welcome to Brash Words, where we say it like we mean it. The only podcast where you hear the truth about business. It's for entrepreneurs who are willing to learn and grow by intently listening to raw and entertaining content that explores and pushes through the fears of running a business. Now, if you're ready to hear the fucking truth about business, here's your host, Sly.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Sylvain Perrier, Sly. I'm your host of Brash Words, and this is episode 14. I'm just playing a little jazz music in the background. It's super early here on Wednesday morning. I'm in Toronto. It's roughly 5:30 in the morning. I came into the office really early to kind of tackle some stuff, and I figured now's a great time to put a episode down. And it's a juicy topic, and it's one that I will tell you, I'm certainly not an expert at this, and it's having difficult conversations. And I will tell you that depending on where you are in your professional life and your personal life, you will have experienced difficult conversations. You know, an example could be if you have children and you have a daughter and she's dating, and she comes to you and she wants to be on the pill. She wants to have access to whatever it's called. She wants to be on the pill, and you got to have that conversation with her. That's a difficult conversation. If you're a business owner and you need to let someone go, that's another example of a difficult conversation. And they don't come easy. I certainly remember my first difficult conversation. I was... my God, when was this? This was a long time ago. I was early in my career. I had just been promoted to director of MIS, which in today's lingo, to a certain extent, it's called director of DevOps. And we had a employee, and she was a wonderful person, single mother of a young daughter at the time, and we had to have multiple conversations with her in terms of performance and so on. And I had to go in and we had made the decision, and I wasn't alone to make the decision, thank God. But I had to go in and let her know that we were letting her go. It wasn't easy. I liked this person. She was really nice. I got to know her daughter because she would bring her into work, and that made it even more difficult for me. And I remember drinking an entire bottle of Pepto-Bismol the night before, and quite frankly, one leading up to that afternoon. And it kind of went in, and had to have the conversation with her and let her go. And that's an example of a difficult conversation. Now, there are tons of other ones that I can think of, you can think of, quite frankly, on your own. But I want to give you the steps. Now, before we kind of jump in, there are two books I always recommend to anyone that is kind of trying to figure this out, is learning and so on. So the first book is written by Susan Scott. It's called Fierce Conversations. That's a really good book. That was the first one that I read, at least, it must have been 8 or 9 years ago. And the second one is written by two authors, Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen, and it's called Difficult Conversations. And both of them kind of, revolve around the same topic, obviously, but have slightly different steps in terms of how you should approach it. They both have good examples and so on. And reality is that you're never an expert at this. There's tons of stuff in the world of administration, management, leadership. None of us are ever experts at. I think some people are better than others. It really depends fundamentally around your personality and so on. So let's settle on a definition, because I find a lot of people really kind of, they misinterpret the concept or the idea of a difficult conversation with an argument or a one-sided argument. So here's a general definition. So it's a discussion about an uncomfortable topic, obviously, or a negative experience. And this is where it really starts to differ, where the goal is to share different perspective and build mutual understanding, right? So that last part again, the goal is to share a different perspective and build mutual understanding. That is a definition of a difficult conversation, discussion, again, about a uncomfortable topic or negative experience. Now, I kind of share with you guys some examples in terms of, having those difficult conversations. I've been on the receiving end of difficult conversations. I whether it was for performance issues, and this would have been years ago, obviously, even receiving a phone call on the morning of my 40th birthday from my sister to let me know that my mother had just perished. That is on the receiving end of a difficult conversation, and it's quite frankly, if you go back to the definition, it is a negative experience. Now, I did say to you guys that difficult conversations don't come easy and they're not natural, and there's a certain reason for that. Most people don't like conflict, and they want to feel like they're liked. They want to feel that they're part of something much bigger than them. There's a certain emotional attachment, an emotional affinity that we have. We want to belong. We want to feel loved. And so we naturally, as human beings, avoid having these conversations. But there are certain people that can really compartmentalize those two things. And the trap that we fall more often than not in a business context is we become friends with the people that we work with. We hang out with them during office hours. We may hang out with them after work, outside of work, and so on. And so those lines can fundamentally get blurred in terms of being able to have difficult conversations. Although I have found that some people are able to kind of do that and kind of separate both. I remember a piece of advice that I got from my first CEO, Peter Andrews. This would have been at In Touch Survey Systems, which I think now is called Insights something or other. He said to me, and I was promoted at a young age into a directorship, and he came to me and he said, the toughest part or the toughest decision you're now going to have to make is you're going to realize that you're not friends with the people that report to you. And I'm like, what is he talking about? I mean, I've never heard about these things. And he was right. He was fundamentally right. And it is a piece of advice that I have carried it on in my career. And I want to impart that back out to you. So let's kind of just jump in with the advice here. So first and foremost, don't avoid these difficult conversations. Do not kick the can down the road. It will just obviously make it fundamentally worse for you, worse for the individual that is, on the receiving end of this difficult conversation, that is engaging in the dialogue with you. And there's a greater chance that it becomes considerably much more emotional. A good example of that, I've experienced this. I've seen this with countless CEOs out in the market. It is the conversation around performance, specifically with someone that reports to you. And in some cases, and I'll kind of amplify the example, the one that just crossed my desk, I would say not even 6 months ago, from a fellow GTA CEO, someone that the employees really like. And not necessarily a history of poor performance. So you brush it as under the rug, or you sweep it under the rug. You sweep it under the rug as saying, oh, this is a one-time occurrence. This individual's fine, having an off day. The second time, it's another excuse. The third time, it's another excuse. When it comes to the fourth or fifth time, you've been so negligent on the person's performance and the results. The negative results are staring you in your face. That the conversation now is much more amplified. It's much more emotional. It's raw, and you've avoided it, and suddenly you're bursting like a dam open here. And in this conversation with the individual, I think the first reaction that I've seen in most cases, they will say, well, why didn't you bring this to my attention sooner? I could have rectified it much quicker, and so on. And now you kind of left the person hanging. So again, don't avoid the difficult conversations. If it's a matter of the heart, if it's a matter of love, entirely different, not my sphere of expertise, quite frankly. But again, do not avoid them. Always start your conversations from a point of curiosity and respect. And quite frankly, it is very much okay to be vulnerable. You want to bring your authentic self to the table when you're having these conversations. And I always say, when you're having these types of conversations, always best to have them face to face. You want the person to see your body language. You want to see their body language. You want to see their reaction. You want them to see your reaction. You want them to see that you're approaching this with empathy and curiosity. And one of my dear mentors, Bernie Nisker, used to say, no important conversation, specifically a business conversation, should ever be had over the phone. And certainly over email. He detested email. He thought it was the devil's tool. I'm paraphrasing. In any case, that's not what he said. But he said, there's an issue, pick up the phone. If it's serious enough, get on a plane, go see that customer, go talk to that employee. You want to sit down face to face. It's the only way you're going to settle an issue. And and his advice applies here in this case here, right? So you do not want to be doing this. Okay, so it's the pandemic. I get it. You have to use Zoom. Makes sense. But if you can, and there's an opportunity to do this face to face, ultimately do that. But again, be vulnerable, be authentic, bring your real self. First point, I want to go back to it. Don't kick the can down the road. Do not avoid them. Again, I can't stress this enough. And put on your listening hat. This is a fundamental mistake that is sometimes had, and this comes with the flurry of emotion that you're kind of having in the context of getting ready for a difficult conversation. You're struggling. You're worried about what the person's going to think of you. You want to choose the right words. You want to be able to emote something. You want to be seen as being empathetic, but you don't want to get hurt. So then you start really worrying about what you're going to say, and people start scripting what they're going to say and rehearsing what they're going to say. And they really start to forget the point, which is to raise the issue, to pause, to explain the consequences of the issue and how and what it's resulted in, and then to go back and just let the silence sit. Let the person absorb, because you can imagine how they're feeling. I know when I'm in the receiving end of a difficult conversation, I become very reflective. I'm really thinking through. I'm actively listening. I don't want to speak for the sake of speaking, just to kind of fill the void. And I want to be able to respond accordingly. And also not to necessarily show I may have an emotional response, which is very okay. But again, so people are trying to script themselves and they avoid the true point, which is just to get to the matter at heart. So I kind of say, hey, just lightly prepare, don't overthink it, be real, be true to yourself, and prepare to listen and to focus on what you're going to hear from the individual, right? Because you're trying to create a consensus. You want to drive to a positive outcome. Now, an example of being overly scripted. So again, I'll go back to my example of firing that single mom early on in my career. I had never, in the context of in a professional environment, I had never fired anyone. So, and I had been, when I started my first job out of college, I would have been 23, 24, I think, right? So as a software developer, and eventually as a senior, back then we called them software developers. So you can imagine how long ago that was. And eventually kind of climbing. Anyways, I had never done it. And we had a great HR person, Kathy Hertais, out of Ottawa. And Kathy is ex-Alcatel, I think. And Kathy kind of like sat me down and she goes, okay, here's the process that we're going to follow, yada, yada, yada. And I said, okay, but what do I say? Like, do I just walk in and say, hey, you're fired? And she goes, no, that's not what you say. She goes, you have to rip the Band-Aid. You can't dance around it. Don't start talking about the weather because you're just kind of leading the person on and thinking it's everything's fine. They're going to find it odd. It's a formal meeting and I'm in the room with you. And it was very cut and dry. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances, but unfortunately today we made the decision to terminate your employment with the organization. Here's the reasons why. Kathy here from HR, we weren't that big, so she knew who Kathy was. Kathy will walk you through your exit package. Thank you. Get up, leave. And if you're new, if you've never done this, that advice stands. There's nothing wrong with that advice. But in terms of a difficult conversation, you're not winning awards, if I was to say that. It's a very cold way to have a difficult conversation. A terrible example is, Jack, when you disturb everyone in the business, they all think you're fucking stupid, and it comes back on me to kind of manage the expectations in the situation here. What are you going to do? But it's another example of a difficult conversation. Let me kind of give you a sense of a kind of a better difficult conversation. Now, again, most prominent examples I can give you this early in the morning really have to do when you terminate an employee. So context here is we had an employee here, not here actually. I went in to help a fellow CEO running a software company, and he was downsizing his sales team for a couple of reasons. One is poor performance, bad recruiting, and quite frankly, they were successful more work than what they can handle, and their inside sales team was doing better than the external team that they had hunting for them. So they needed to do a downsizing exercise. And so one of the individuals, unfortunately, I was part of that downsizing, had been with his organization for over, I call it 8 or 9 years. And my understanding is this was a person that was very, very well liked across the organization, hard worker. But in any case, there wasn't room to transition this individual into another role, nor did they have the skill set to be able to do that, which is unfortunate. And these things happen. So I put on my coaching hat and kind of explained to the individual, I think you just need to go in and be very honest, give room for this person to absorb, to think, to be able to ask questions and be prepared to answer. And the outcome that you're wanting to drive towards here, and expect the unexpected, but you're driving towards an understanding that today's the day, it's over, and you're going to both go your own way, but you'll be there to support each other if necessary. So we painted the picture of what is a positive outcome, and where do you need to draw the line, and don't overscript. So let's call this CEO Jack, because I kind of like that name right now. So Jack sat down and said to let's call this individual Shirley, and said, Shirley, I have some bad news to share with you. So right away, and I was there, and so right away, Shirley was mentally prepared to have a difficult conversation. So that first warning went up, which is the right thing to do. Is if you're framing the person's mind to receive bad news. And he said, I've had to make a difficult decision, and that decision is your employment with our organization is coming to an end today. And the reasons that I made this difficult decision are as follows. So he gave logical backing on the decision that he made. And so Shirley was, you could just tell, she slumped in her chair, her shoulders went down, she was dejected, she was sad. which is a very natural response to receiving this news. And then he said, I'm going to pause and I want to get your feedback. And then he let the silence sit. Right thing to do. Give the person room. 100%. Give them room. And then she said, which completely caught me off guard. She said, I understand the difficult decision you had to make. I know that it's likely a decision that you did not take lightly. And I want to say thank you so much. I've been here for X number of years. I've learned so much. I'll be able to carry this knowledge with me moving forward in my career. And he was relieved because he could sense that there was no animosity. There was not a lot of emotion at the table. And he drove to what he had anticipated being his outcome. And best of all, he didn't avoid it. He wasn't scripted. And quite frankly, he was prepared to answer her questions, which were tons of questions because they had to go through the package, the outplacement, kind of all those great things that go with this. And they're not great things, but it's part of life. And the best thing that happened was she ended up being recruited by the organization that was managing the whole Salesforce implementation. So she wasn't out of a job for a long time. She got a great reference and all those great things. But going back to Jack, he really followed those, what I call my 4 key steps. Actually, he followed a 5th one, which was partner up. So that's a great positive example of this. Like a negative example, certainly the one that I just did. Another negative example, especially in the technology sector, is when you're having to call a client and let them know that something's going to be delayed for a specific reason. And what you find more often than not, this is where you see the notion of avoidance. Individuals that are not versed in a specific topic, and if you're having to give bad news, their emotional reaction can be significantly amplified, where you're not ready to receive that emotional flurry, that emotional amplification. And what I recommend is remain calm, let the storm pass. But you also, this is where to a certain extent proper preparation is very important in terms of how you deliver this message. In the sense, hey, by the way, this is what's going to happen. Here are the reasons why. Here's what we've considered as an alternative. And here's the pros and cons of an alternative. And here's what our recommendations are. Would like to get your feedback. So what you're doing to a certain extent, you're not necessarily overly preparing to have a difficult conversation, but you're structuring the difficult conversation. So there's a difference between those two things. So, when you terminate an employee, obviously, there's, delivering the message and then, acceptance of the message, the reason why, and then what does kind of the exit look like and how you structured a package for this individual. Well, delivering having a difficult conversation with a client is essentially no different. You're not overly scripted. You're not reading from an email or from a memo. But again, how you choose to deliver that message is fundamentally on a backdrop of structure. Again, here's why. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we've explored, pros and cons. Would like to get your feedback. So I want to go over my steps. So number 1, start from a place of curiosity. Be very respectful. 2, focus on listening and get to the point. Don't over script yourself. It's a conversation, right? It's called difficult conversations. It's not called difficult, let me fucking read from my script here and, ruin your life. That's not the case. Don't delay. Don't ever kick the can down the road, because I'm telling you, it's just going to get worse over time, quite frankly. And plan and expect a positive outcome and adjust accordingly. Now, if I go back to that example where Jack and Shirley were having a conversation, she could have, well within her right, she could have got up, screamed, threw something at her and said, fuck you, I've been here for 10 years, the best years of my life. You built a sales team on my back. You're a bastard. You're going to pay me the money I'm due, yada, yada, yada. So that could have been a reaction. Now, is it driving towards Jack's, expected positive outcome? Absolutely not. What would he have done in that case? Well, I was in the room with him. So if Shirley would have said that, I would just kind of just looked at him and said, let her react. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with the way she's reacting. It's a reasonable reaction considering the circumstances. And if it's to the point where you cannot no longer have a conversation with that individual because of the way that they are reacting, and you've let the silence sit and it's not working, you defer the conversation. Shirley, I understand the way you feel. What I would recommend, don't even acknowledge the reaction. I understand the way you feel, but acknowledge the fact that you understand how they feel. I understand the way you feel. Let me suggest this. How about you take the rest of the day off? You can go home. And she's going to say, you already fucking fired me. Obviously. Take your things, go home, and we'll plan to have a chat tomorrow by phone before the end of the day, or if you prefer, why don't you come back in the office? We'll sit down and we'll have a conversation. And we'll continue the conversation. So you're giving that buffer of time for a person to kind of step back. It's a lot easier. Now, a more personal example was, so I was not surprised when my sister called me to tell me mom had passed away at 4:30 in the morning. We had prepared my brother the night before. He had to go. He was with her. He had to go to San Francisco for work. He had to come home. He had to come back home, and he was taking a break from being at the hospital. My sister stepped in, and I'm like, let's avoid the difficult conversation with him in the next few days, the more difficult conversation, but let's kind of have a precursor. And I called him. I said, hey, Mark, I want to let you know, spoke to the doctor. News isn't looking positive. They expect the mom will likely perish in the next 48 hours, maybe 72 hours if we're lucky. So I want to let you know, at some point, you're likely going to get a phone call from one of us just to kind of let you know that she has passed. And then, because this is a close matter of the heart. And I said, how do you feel about this right now? How are you receiving this message? And then I paused. And then obviously he acknowledged it. We talked it over. So it's just a play in this case here. I tend in the business world not to draw too much the conversation around emotion unless I see a spot to do that in terms of how it may be influencing a person's reaction or their thinking. That's just an example, okay? So don't delay, precursor, expect a positive outcome, and adjust accordingly. Now, the fifth step here, and this is a hidden gem, it may be difficult. Especially if you have a team of young managers, young directors that are kind of just learning what it's like to get work done through others, and they're not necessarily skilled. You want to give them the opportunity, yes, absolutely, to make mistakes, but it gets, when you're dealing with terminations and other difficult types of conversations, specifically around performance, you want to give them the opportunity to come to you to partner up. And you want to take the opportunity to partner up, whether it's with another executive, whether it's with your CEO, whether it's your people and cultures team, whether it's someone from the outside, someone that you trust, that you kind of have these, you can kind of really get into the nitty gritty of it. Partner up, is nothing wrong with that. You get a fresh perspective. And so you also have to adjust for the type of person you're having a conversation with. It's like a difficult conversation with an introvert is entirely different if you're dealing with an extrovert. I mean, I've had conversations with, tough conversations with extroverts, and my God, it's like silence doesn't sit. And you got to repeat, your thoughts over and over and over again. Prepare to adjust. That's really, really, really critical. And then sometimes when if you're dealing it with an introvert, they're analytical. They're thinking it through. They're absorbing it. And you got to be comfortable with letting the silence sit. You got to give them the room to come back at a later date to ask even more questions, and be thoughtful in going in to check with them. Same with your extrovert, quite frankly. You got to go back and re-engage with them to make sure that they clearly understood what was discussed. All right, one more time, those 5 steps, and then we're going to get into it, tail from the road. Start from a place of curiosity and respect. 2, focus on listening and getting to the point. 3, do not delay. Do not kick the can down the road. Expect a positive outcome. Adjust accordingly. And the hidden gem, number 5, partner up. Super, super important. All right. Okay, so let's wrap up the show with a tale from the road. I gotta play a little bit of mood music in the background here. This tale from the road is I titled it, "Oh My God, She's Going to Hit Me." And it was an this is so early on in my career. I'm in Ottawa, the nation's capital, and I am running on a part-time basis. I have a full-time job, obviously, but within the context of my employment, I'm responsible for a floating member on our help desk. 2, at some point, I inherited running the help desk. And running a help desk, for some people, can be a burden. I kind of liked it because it was different every single phone call. You got to interact with people. You got to, just to really see the benefit of what your technology was doing in terms of their career. So one of our clients at the time was at the time and is still today one of the country's largest banks. So this call comes through into the help desk saying, we have a local branch manager that's having issues and wondering, since we're local, could we come in and try to rectify this situation? Do you mind kind of grabbing some spare parts and some tools and going in to try to fix the computer? I'm like, yeah, happy to, because I get to get out of the office. I'm kind of touring downtown Ottawa, which is, compared to what downtown Ottawa is today with the blockade, was kind of great. It was summertime. So I go into the back warehouse, grab some parts. I read this. I have kind of the call log. I know what's kind of transpired and what's been tried by my fellow members of the help desk. Grab my tools, grab everything, throw it in the back of the car, and then kind of zip over to the branch and then go in. And I can tell, the computer's been dragged into this person's office, in her office, the branch manager's office. And this thing's not light, and it's cumbersome, and it's tall, and it's a kiosk, and that's a bit of a kind of interesting place to kind of pull it. And she was not happy. Did not greet me. Did not shake my hand. Did not acknowledge when I introduced myself. Told her why I was here, and because the first words out of her mouth was, "Can you just fucking fix this thing?" I like, okay, this is off to a bad start already. And I know that this is critical to get up and running because data collected from this technology is supporting percentages of bonuses and yada, yada, kind of all those great things. And I realize as I'm trying to early stages of trying to repair this computer, first of all, I don't even have the right parts because the call log was completely wrong. No wonder they couldn't fix this over the phone. I can't even fix this. I need to go get more parts. So I turn around and I say, I'm really sorry, but I now know what the issue is. And unfortunately, I do not have the correct parts on me. My office is down the road about 30 minutes. I will go get those parts and I will come back and fix this. And barring any issues with traffic and so on, this will be rectified well before lunchtime. And I remember that because the next reaction kind of locked everything that I said into my mind. Fuck you and your fucking computer. Take this fucking thing out of my fucking office. And she proceeds to grab one of those gray power bars, power strips, whatever you guys call them where you live, and starts to swing it like she's gonna lasso me, but she's swinging from the cord, so the kind of the big bar is like going around and around. Suddenly, like she's David Lee Roth at a concert here in '84, and she takes a power bar and she slams it down on her desk, and it's like you hear the noise. Her pencil holder fucking flew, and I was backing away, and my back and her desk is facing the rest of the branch, so the employees are like, and the patrons in the bank are like, what the fuck is going on in there? So I'm like, I gotta go, I gotta leave. And I'm like, she had this look on her eye, in her eyes, I had never seen. So anyways, I didn't go back. I wasn't going to go back because I didn't know what she was going to do. So, oh my God, she's going to fucking kill me is the story. How to have quote unquote difficult conversations, and quite more appropriately, how do you deal with people that kind of react in a certain way? So I stayed relatively calm. I grabbed my things. I said, well, thank you very much. Have a great day. I didn't say I was coming back. I didn't say I wasn't coming back. I just fucking left. So that's my story. So folks, really appreciate your time. I'm going to, next episode 15, is likely going to be on emotional resiliency, which I think is very apropos in this day and age, and what's happening in industry, what's happening in the context of the pandemic, things that are kind of hitting us, the potential war in the Ukraine, inflation, cost of energy going up. How do we become emotional resilience in these very difficult times? So stay tuned for that next episode on any of your favorite podcast networks. If you have any questions, email me, sylvain.perrier@brashwords.com or podcast@brashwords.com. Visit my website, sylvainperrier.com. Follow the podcast on Twitter and as well on Instagram @Brash Words. Peace out and have a fucking great day.
Thanks for listening to Brash Words. If you liked hearing the truth about business, then follow us on Twitter and Instagram @Brash Words. And for more great content, visit our website, brashwords.com. Join us next time for more real, raw, honest truth about running your business.